It started with a dusty metal box and a $3 bid at a local auction. A veteran mom thought she'd just bought an old keepsake, maybe something sentimental, maybe worthless. But what she found inside would drag her into a web of espionage, betrayal, and a Cold War secret buried for nearly half a century. By the time the FBI got involved, her quiet suburban life was gone, replaced by headlines, suspicion, and millions of dollars that no one could explain. Before we uncover how a $3 box changed one woman's life forever, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes karma, secrets, and justice are hidden in the most ordinary places. On a quiet Saturday morning in the small town of Maple Ridge, a local community center hosted its monthly charity auction. The event was routine: retirees, bargain hunters, and families looking for trinkets or forgotten treasures. Among them was Claire Donovan, a 42-year-old single mom and former Air Force mechanic. She wasn't there to spend money, just to browse, maybe find something interesting for her teenage son's school project. Claire had always been practical. After years in service, she'd learned to make do with little. So when she noticed an old olive green metal box on a side table, half buried under a pile of faded photographs and kitchenware, her curiosity stirred. It was scratched heavy and bore faint stenciled letters. U.S. property. No one else seemed interested. The auctioneer barely gave it attention when he lifted it up, declaring, "Lot 214, unknown contents, appears military issue, starting at $2. A few chuckles echoed through the hall. Claire hesitated only a moment before raising her hand. $3, she said. No one countered. Sold. The box was hers. Back home, Claire placed it on her kitchen table. The box had a strange weight, not just physical, but emotional. It was locked, but the latch was rusted enough to pry open with a screwdriver. As the lid creaked open, a faint metallic scent filled the room, like oil and time. Inside were two objects. First, a small stack of sealed envelopes marked classified and do not reproduce. The paper was yellow but intact, edges crisp, as though untouched for decades. Second, wrapped in an oily rag, lay something unexpected. A small, silver device roughly the size of a deck of cards, with strange engravings and a dial. It wasn't anything she recognized from her time in the Air Force. It looked older, Cold War era, perhaps. At first, Claire assumed it was a prop or a collector's item. But when she noticed the faint serial number and the etched insignia of the Department of Defense, a shiver crawled down her spine. The envelopes were even stranger. Each was numbered and sealed with wax. Inside the first, she found old technical schematics written in Russian and English. The drawings depicted a satellite guidance chip and something labeled Project Wintervale. Claire's heart pounded. She knew she shouldn't be reading this. The last time she saw markings like that, she'd been in uniform, working on classified systems that never made it to the public. But curiosity overpowered fear. The second envelope contained black and white photographs, military men in trench coats, standing beside radar trucks. One image caught her eye. A younger version of a man she recognized from old documentaries, General Malcolm Trent, a Cold War intelligence officer rumored to have vanished in 1974 during a secret operation in Berlin. The documents hinted at something buried, something about retrieval protocol and a satellite payload hidden under civilian storage. It was a third envelope, however, that made her hands tremble. Inside was a handwritten note addressed to whoever finds this. It read, "They'll never tell the truth, but this device was never meant to be used. If you're reading this, do not trust anyone from the department. Keep it safe. The signal is still active." Claire dropped the paper. The signal is still active? She turned back to the device, staring at the small dial on its surface. It wasn't just metal. There was a faint hum, barely audible, almost imperceptible. She held it close to her ear. It vibrated rhythmically like a pulse. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every flicker of light from outside made her uneasy. By midnight, she'd wrapped the box again and shoved it in her closet. She told herself it was nothing, old junk. But the next morning, her phone rang. It was a restricted number. When she answered, there was a brief silence, then a voice calm but firm. "Ms. Donovan, this is Special Agent Riley from the Department of Defense. We need to speak with you about a recent purchase you made at the Maple Ridge auction." Her blood ran cold. She hadn't told anyone, not even her son, about the box. "How do you—" she began, but the call ended before she could finish. Her hands shook. How did they know? Moments later, she heard the sound of a car engine idling outside her house. Peeking through the blinds, she saw a black SUV, parked across the street, its windows tinted. It hadn't been there before. Over the next few hours, the SUV didn't move. Neither did Claire. She sat in her living room, frozen, as questions spiraled in her mind. What had she found? Why were they watching her? By sunset, a storm rolled in and thunder rattled the windows. Claire finally decided to move the box to a safer place. She wrapped it in a towel and hid it beneath the false floor panel in her garage, a trick she'd learned in the service. When she stepped back inside, she noticed something else. Her laptop screen was glowing, even though she hadn't touched it all day. A message flashed across the screen, as if remotely typed. "You opened it. They're coming." The screen went black. Claire's breath hitched. She turned toward the window and saw a man standing just beyond the light of the storm. He was watching her. The rain came down in sheets, hammering the roof and flooding the gutters, but Claire barely noticed. Her pulse roared louder than the storm. The figure outside didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even seem to care about the rain soaking his clothes. He just stood there, his silhouette faintly illuminated by the flickering streetlight. For a long moment, Claire didn't breathe. Then instinct, the kind drilled into her during her years in uniform, took over. She killed the lights, moved low, and peered from behind the curtain again. The man was gone, but the SUV across the street remained. Lightning flashed, and for half a second, she thought she saw the faint reflection of eyes inside, watching her window. She stepped back, heart pounding. Her son, Tyler, was asleep upstairs. She couldn't panic, not now. Quietly, she moved through the house, double-checking locks, unplugging devices, even pulling the battery from her laptop. The message still echoed in her mind. "You opened it. They're coming." Who sent it? Was it a warning or a threat? When morning came, the SUV was gone. But in its place, near her mailbox, she found something small and deliberate. A silver coin, military style, engraved with the emblem of an eagle clutching lightning bolts. The words Project Wintervale, Retrieval Unit, were etched along the rim. Her hands trembled. It was the same name from the documents in the box. Someone knew she had it. By noon, she was on her way to Fort Brant, the nearest active base. Her military ID was still valid for limited access, though she hadn't used it in years. If anyone could help her verify what she'd found, it would be someone there, someone who knew the old projects. At the gate, the guards checked her credentials, then waved her through after a few questions. She drove to the archives office, a quiet, windowless building lined with filing cabinets and old computer terminals. The man at the front desk, a retired sergeant she vaguely remembered, looked up and smiled. "Claire Donovan, haven't seen you in years. What brings you here?" She smiled faintly, masking her unease. "Just researching some Cold War data for a school presentation. Project Wintervale. Ever heard of it?" The man's expression changed instantly. The easy warmth vanished from his face. He straightened, tapping his pen against the desk. "Where'd you hear that name?" Claire tried to sound casual. "Old reference. Maybe a code name. It was in some archive listing, I think." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Wintervale was classified above top secret. There's nothing public. Not even most officers had clearance." Her pulse spiked. "What was it?" He looked uneasy, then shook his head. "All I know, rumor says it was a countermeasure program. Something about satellite encryption during the Cold War. But the operation went dark in '74. Supposedly destroyed after a fire in Berlin. Everyone involved either disappeared or died." Claire forced a nod. "Got it. Thanks." She turned to leave, but the man called out, "Claire." She stopped. "Whatever you're looking into, let it go." Some things from that era, they were never meant to resurface. That night, as she drove home, she couldn't shake his words. Let it go. But she couldn't. When she reached her street, she froze. Her front door was slightly ajar. The porch light, which she'd left off that morning, was on. She parked a block away, grabbed her old flashlight from the glove compartment, and approached cautiously. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy. Inside, drawers were open. Her closet door hung wide. The false floor panel in the garage was displaced, and the box was gone. Her stomach dropped. Whoever had been watching had finally made their move. But just as she was about to call the police, she noticed something glinting under the workbench. Kneeling, she found a torn scrap of paper, half soaked in oil. It was from one of the classified envelopes, and scribbled across it, in hurried handwriting, was a phrase she hadn't seen before. Signal origin, Fairmont Storage Unit number 42. Fairmont was a small industrial park on the edge of town, mostly forgotten, filled with rusting shipping containers and rental units. She didn't sleep that night. By dawn, Claire was parked outside Fairmont, the rising sun casting long shadows across rows of corrugated metal doors. Most units were vacant. The place smelled of dust and oil. Unit 42 was near the back. Its lock new, its metal cleaner than the others. Someone had been here recently. She crouched low, inspecting the ground. Mud tracks, wide tires, heavy vehicle. Recent rain still pooled in impressions. Then she heard it, a faint electronic hum. Familiar, the same rhythmic pulse she'd heard from the device. Her hands tightened around her flashlight. Slowly, she moved closer. Behind the unit, half hidden under a tarp, she saw it. The same black SUV from outside her house. Her heart raced. Before she could react, the unit door rolled upward with a metallic shriek. Claire ducked behind a crate. Two men in tactical gear stepped out, both carrying cases marked with the same insignia as a coin, Project Wintervale. Between them was a metal box. Open now, the device inside wired to a larger control panel connected to a small antenna. She realized then they weren't just retrieving it, they were reactivating it. Claire's mind raced. What was that thing really doing? One man spoke, his tone urgent but calm. The signal stabilizing. Transmission to orbit reestablished. If this works. Lightning cracked across the sky. The antenna sparked. The device began to pulse faster, louder, its hum building into a deep, resonant vibration that made the ground tremble. The men panicked, trying to disconnect the wires, but it was too late. The air shimmered, and a wave of static burst outward, knocking them both to the ground. Claire shielded her face, the flashlight flickering. When the light settled, the men were unconscious, and the device had gone dark. Smoke rose from the control panel. Claire stepped forward, her breath shallow. She looked at the now charred metal box, the same one she bought for $3, and realized this was far bigger than she ever imagined. As she turned to leave, headlights flared at the far end of the lot. More SUVs. Armed men. She grabbed the device, tucked it under her jacket, and ran into the storm. Behind her, a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Miss Donovan, stop. You're in possession of restricted government property." She didn't look back, because deep down she knew she wasn't just running from the government anymore. She was running from a secret someone had killed to protect. The rain turned the world into a blur of silver and shadow as Claire sprinted across the industrial yard, clutching the still-warm device under her jacket. Her boots splashed through puddles, her breath ragged, adrenaline burning through her chest like fire. Behind her, voices shouted. Men in tactical gear spreading out, flashlights cutting through the dark. Every instinct screamed, "Don't stop." She cut between rows of shipping containers, ducking behind one just as a beam of light swept past. Her hands trembled, gripping the metal tighter. The device was silent now, no hum, no glow, but it pulsed faintly with heat, as if something inside it was still alive. From her hiding spot, she could hear the men regrouping. "Fan out. She can't have gone far." Claire's mind raced. She knew she couldn't go home. Not now. They'd be waiting. Whoever these men were, they weren't local police. And whatever Project Wintervale really was, It wasn't just a relic of the past. She pulled her phone from her pocket. No signal. The storm had knocked out service. But even if it hadn't, she couldn't risk being tracked. She powered it off and tossed it under a crate. When the footsteps faded, she slipped out through a side fence, tearing her jacket on the wire. The world beyond the yard was dark and silent, a long stretch of wet road leading toward the hills outside town. She didn't stop walking until she reached the tree line, the beginning of Black Ridge Forest, an overgrown patch of land the locals avoided. She'd worked nearby once, during her service. There were old communication towers deep inside, decommissioned, forgotten. Maybe, she thought, not all of them. By dawn, the rain had eased into mist. Claire moved cautiously through the forest, mud clinging to her boots, her body aching from exhaustion. She found a small clearing near a rusted chain-link fence, and beyond it, a concrete bunker half buried under moss and vines. The sign was barely legible. U.S. government property, restricted area, 1968. Claire pried open the fence, slipping through. The bunker's metal door groaned as she pushed it open, revealing a narrow corridor leading downward into darkness. Inside, the air was cold and stale. Dust motes swirled in her flashlight beam. Rows of ancient computer consoles lined the walls, their switches corroded, cables dangling like vines. It was like stepping into a ghost of the Cold War. She set the device on a metal table and studied it closely. Up close, she could see the faint engravings more clearly now. Mathematical notations, maybe frequency codes, etched along the edges. There was also something she hadn't noticed before, a small port, circular, designed for a connector that didn't look modern. She glanced around the bunker. If this was part of the same project, maybe the equipment here could interface with it. After half an hour of searching, she found a matching cable frayed but intact. She plugged it in, connected it to a rusted terminal, and waited. Nothing happened. Then, suddenly, a low hum filled the air. The device began to glow faintly blue, the same rhythmic pulse returning, this time syncing with the faint flicker of the terminal's ancient display. Claire leaned closer. Lines of code began scrolling across the monitor. Old command strings, mostly in Cyrillic, mixed with English. Then words appeared, flickering as though written by an unseen hand. Signal restored. Awaiting verification key. Her heart pounded. She had no key, no idea what to enter. But then the screen changed again. User detected. Donovan C. Access level unknown. She froze. How did it know her name? Before she could react, the monitor flashed again, and the sound of static filled the room, growing sharper, clearer, until it resolved into a faint voice. A woman's voice. If you're hearing this, then the protocol has been breached. Claire's breath caught. Project Wintervale was not a defense system. It was containment. The device you've activated controls a signal that was never meant to reach orbit. It was designed to mask something, not transmit it. If the signal stops, they'll find it. The location. The satellite. Static crackled, then silence. Claire sat back, stunned. Containment? What was being contained? She tried to type a command, but before she could, the screen flickered violently, then went black. At that same moment, her flashlight dimmed, the air around her thickening with an electrical charge. The device on the table began to vibrate again, faster this time. Then she heard it, a deep, low-frequency tone that seemed to come from underground. The walls of the bunker trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. It wasn't just a device. Something beneath the earth was responding to it. Claire scrambled to disconnect the cable, but the plug was fused in place, glowing hot. She yanked it free with a burst of sparks, the light blinding her for a second. When her vision cleared, the device's glow had stopped. But outside, through the trees, she could see something new. A faint blue light, pulsing in the distance, deep in the forest. She grabbed her flashlight, adrenaline taking over once more, and made her way toward it. The deeper she went, the brighter it grew, until she reached a clearing she didn't recognize. In the center stood what looked like a metal hatch, round and massive, half covered by roots and soil. The light was emanating from beneath it, seeping through the cracks. Claire approached slowly. Her fingers brushed the cold metal. There were markings, Russian, English, even mathematical symbols, carved into the surface. Then she saw it, a logo identical to the one on the device. Project Wintervale, Contingency Site B. Her breath quickened. This wasn't a communications bunker. It was a vault, a containment vault, and whatever was sealed beneath it was waking up. She stumbled back just as the ground shuddered. The light flared brighter, and a high-pitched tone filled the air, forcing her to cover her ears. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The forest fell silent. Claire stood in the cold morning light, staring at the now-still hatch, every part of her trembling. Somewhere behind her, the sound of engines broke the silence. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. She turned toward the road. Through the trees, dark shapes moved, black SUVs again. And at the front of them, stepping out into the clearing, was a man she hadn't seen before. Tall, gray-haired, wearing a long coat with military insignia she hadn't seen in decades. He looked directly at her, then at the hatch, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Donovan," he said calmly, "you've just reopened something the world buried for a reason." He lifted a small device, a scanner, which beeped softly as it pointed toward her. And then, almost to himself, he whispered, "It's still transmitting." The ground rumbled again. Claire's heart pounded as the man turned toward her, eyes cold and sharp. "Come with us," he said, "before the others find you first." But Claire didn't move, because behind him, the hatch began to move, slowly, mechanically, opening, and the light spilling from within was not blue anymore. It was red. The sound was unlike anything Claire had ever heard, a low, mechanical groan that seemed to echo from the heart of the earth itself. The hatch at the center of the clearing split open with a hiss of steam, and that red light poured upward like blood through a wound. The men in black froze, their flashlights cutting through mist as they turned toward it. The tall man in the long coat, the one who'd spoken to her, shouted an order, but his voice was lost in the roar of the opening vault. Claire stumbled backward, shielding her eyes. The ground trembled under her boots. For a split second, she caught sight of something moving below, shapes, machinery maybe, or something far older, before the steam swallowed everything again. Then, silence. The hatch was open. The man lowered his scanner and looked straight at her. "You need to leave," he said, his tone low but urgent. "Now." Claire didn't move. "What is it?" she managed to ask. He hesitated, just a second too long. "Something we buried in 1974, he said, "and something your box wasn't supposed to wake up." Before she could reply, one of the agents near the hatch shouted. The light intensified, and the man's scream was cut short. A sharp, sickening sound that made Claire's blood run cold. The others ran forward, weapons drawn, but it was too late. The red glow surged again, brighter this time, and their shadows twisted across the trees like living things. Claire turned and ran. Branches whipped her face as she tore through the forest, every instinct screaming to get away. Behind her, the forest pulsed with light, red flashes that illuminated the trunks in rhythmic bursts. It wasn't fire. It wasn't an explosion. It was something alive. By the time she reached the road, her lungs burned, her hair plastered to her face. She didn't look back. She just ran until she reached the outskirts of town, the familiar glow of streetlights piercing the mist like safety beacons. She ducked behind a gas station, catching her breath. Every muscle in her body ached. Her mind reeled with fragments, the man's warning, the red light, the words from that old recording. It was containment. Whatever had been buried in that forest, it wasn't just a weapon. It was something they'd tried and failed to keep from being found. She needed answers. Claire made her way to an old friend, someone she hadn't spoken to in years but knew she could trust. Ethan Ward, a journalist who'd once specialized in declassified military leaks. They'd served together briefly, and he'd always had a knack for uncovering what others wanted buried. She reached his apartment just before dawn, banging on the door until it opened. Ethan's eyes widened when he saw her, soaked, trembling, pale. "Claire, you look like you've seen a ghost." She didn't waste time. She told him everything. The auction, the box, the documents, the device, the bunker, and finally, the hatch in the woods. By the time she finished, Ethan was silent, scrolling through his old database on his laptop. After several tense minutes, he found something, an old, redacted file. Project Wintervale, 1974 classified dossier status. Terminated objective. Containment of recovered Soviet payload. Details. Object emits unknown frequency in subradio range. Attempts to neutralize unsuccessful. Protocol initiated to seal object beneath U.S. soil following Berlin incident. Claire leaned closer. Recovered Soviet payload? Ethan nodded slowly. Cold War paranoia at its peak. The Soviets launched hundreds of satellites. Some were communication relays. Others, rumor says, were experiments. Bio-coded signals, atmospheric tests, even psychological warfare. But this... He scrolled further, revealing one more line, half buried under layers of redaction. If the containment fails, the transmission may resume. Do not engage the source. The signal is self-sustaining. Claire's heart sank. You mean the red light? Isn't a weapon, Ethan interrupted softly. It's a signal, something trying to reestablish contact. With what? She whispered. He looked up at her, his face pale. Not with Earth. The words hit her like a blow. Before either of them could speak again, the apartment lights flickered, once, twice, and went out. Ethan glanced toward the window. A faint red glow shimmered on the horizon, toward Blackridge Forest. Tell me you didn't bring that thing here, he said, his voice tight. Claire reached into her bag, the small, scorched metal device. The dial on its surface was spinning slowly, the faintest hum returning. She looked up. It's following the signal. Then the hum deepened. A pattern of tones emerged, long, short, long, rhythmic, deliberate. It wasn't random. It was communication. Ethan started recording, typing furiously, running the tones through an old decoding program. When the result appeared, his face went pale. Transmission received. Station B online. He looked at Claire, his voice barely a whisper. There's another one. Before they could say anything more, the floor trembled, a deep, distant vibration that made the window glass rattle. Claire's instincts kicked in. She grabbed the device, stuffed it back into her jacket, and pulled Ethan toward the door. We have to move. Outside, chaos was unfolding. Across town, the red glow was spreading. Faint pulses lighting up the sky like a storm. People were emerging from houses, confused, filming with their phones. Cars stopped in the streets. Dogs barked. Somewhere an alarm wailed. From the forest direction came a deep hum, a sound so low it could be felt more than heard. The air vibrated, thick and electric. Claire and Ethan ran toward her truck, but before she could start the engine, her radio, which had been dead for months, crackled to life. Containment breach confirmed. Wintervale sites compromised. Repeat, do not approach the signal. The voice cut out, replaced by static. Ethan stared at her. They're losing control of it. Claire clenched the steering wheel. Then we stop it before it spreads. She hit the gas, tires screeching as they tore down the road toward the forest. Behind them, the horizon pulsed brighter, like the heartbeat of something awakening after 50 years of silence. As they drove, Ethan glanced at the device glowing between them. If that signal isn't from Earth, he said quietly, then what exactly are we waking up? Claire didn't answer, because deep down, she was starting to understand. It wasn't just a satellite. It was a beacon. And now it had been answered. The highway leading back toward Blackridge was almost empty. Most of the town was awake now, drawn outside by the strange red light that pulsed through the clouds like a slow, steady heartbeat. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't the aurora. It was something else entirely, something deliberate. Claire gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. Ethan sat beside her, laptop open, its screen flickering with lines of code as he monitored the frequencies emitted by the device resting between them. Each pulse of the red glow in the sky matched perfectly with the readings on his display. It's synchronized, he muttered. The light, the tone, the electromagnetic spike. Whatever's underground is sending and receiving. This isn't just a broadcast. It's a response loop. Claire's mind raced. You mean it's talking to something? Or something's talking back? Ethan said quietly. The road curved into the forest, the trees standing like blackened pillars against the bleeding sky. The air buzzed with static. Her truck's radio picked up fragments of voices, some human, some not. Faint, distorted echoes of old military transmissions, interlaced with tones that made her ears ache. Then, suddenly, the truck's engine died. The lights flickered out, plunging them into darkness. Claire hit the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a stop. "We're not out of gas," she said. "It's electromagnetic interference." Ethan looked out the window. "Look." Through the trees, they could see the clearing again, the one with the hatch. It was no longer sealed. The red light poured upward in thick, fog-like waves. Around it, several SUVs had abandoned, their doors hanging open, lights still flashing weakly. No agents in sight. Claire and Ethan moved cautiously through the wet grass, the sound of distant thunder rolling overhead. The air tasted metallic, heavy with ozone. When they reached the clearing, they stopped dead. The hatch was fully open now, revealing a vast shaft leading down into the earth. The walls shimmered faintly metallic but covered in strange geometric patterns that glowed red, then dimmed, then glowed again, pulsing like a heartbeat. A deep hum resonated from below, steady and mechanical, yet disturbingly organic. Ethan whispered, "This wasn't built by humans." Claire didn't respond. She stepped closer to the edge, peering down. At the bottom of the shaft, half buried in darkness, she could see an enormous structure, circular, metallic, with veins of crimson light running through it. It was connected to cables and steel beams, human attempts to contain it, but those had all been melted or torn away. "It's alive," Ethan breathed. Suddenly, a voice echoed from behind them. "Step away from the pit." They spun around. It was a tall man from before, the one in the long coat, flanked by a small squad of armed soldiers. His face was grave, illuminated by the red glow. "I told you to leave this alone," he said. "You've triggered a response protocol older than you can imagine." Claire stood her ground. "What is it?" The man exhaled slowly. During the Cold War, both sides were desperate for an edge. In 1973, the Soviets launched a satellite they couldn't explain, not even to themselves. It didn't appear on any known trajectory. It broadcasted for exactly 12 minutes before going silent. When our intelligence intercepted it, we realized it wasn't a satellite at all. It was something that arrived, not launched. Ethan's eyes widened. "It crashed." The man nodded. "Near Berlin. Both sides reached it within hours. But it wasn't a weapon. It was a signal source. We tried to study it, control it, replicate it. That project was codenamed Wintervale." Claire's stomach turned. "And you buried it." "Yes," he said, after it began to respond to transmissions that didn't originate on this planet. Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment, Claire saw the fear in his eyes, a kind of fear only men who've seen impossible things can carry. "It took decades," he continued, "but we managed to contain the core underground. The device you found was the key, the suppressor. It kept the beacon dormant until you opened it." Claire felt the weight of his words settle in her chest like ice. "So, this isn't about espionage. It's about something not human." Before he could reply, the ground trembled violently. The red light from the shaft flared brighter than ever, painting the forest in crimson. Everyone staggered. The air filled with a deep, harmonic sound, not mechanical, not natural. It was language. The soldiers covered their ears, shouting, but their voices were drowned out by the sound that wasn't a sound, a vibration that seemed to move through the bones more than the air. Ethan looked at his laptop. The screen was filled with symbols, rearranging faster than human eyes could follow. Then, all at once, they froze into words. "Received. Signal confirmed. Arrival initiated." The hum grew louder. The earth shook again. The man in the coat turned to his men. "Fall back. Containment's breached." Claire grabbed Ethan's arm and ran as the clearing exploded with energy. Trees splintered, dirt lifted, and a column of red light shot skyward, slicing through the clouds like a spear. The sound was deafening, a resonant, pulsating tone that shook the air itself. For a few seconds, it looked almost beautiful. the forest illuminated, the storm parting above, then the power cut through everything. SUVs were thrown into the air like toys. The soldiers vanished in flashes of light. Claire and Ethan dug behind a fallen log, shielding themselves from the blast. The red beam flickered, then dimmed. Silence. When Claire opened her eyes, the clearing was gone, replaced by a crater of smoking soil and twisted metal. The hatch had vanished. The red light was gone, but in its place, deep within the crater, something new had emerged, a black sphere, perfectly smooth, about the size of a house, faintly humming. Ethan stared wide-eyed. "It's not transmitting anymore," he whispered. "It's receiving." Claire felt a cold realization wash over her. The beacon hadn't called something from space. It had called down something already here, something waiting to be awakened. As the first rays of dawn cut through the mist, she could see movement inside the sphere. Shadows shifting, shapes forming. The man in the long coat stumbled to his feet, bleeding from a gash on his forehead. "It's begun," he said, voice hoarse. "They found us again." Claire turned to him. "Who?" He looked up at the sky, now streaked with faint red trails. "Not who," he said softly. "What?" A low rumble echoed from deep underground, growing louder, and as Claire stared into the smoking crater, she realized this was no longer about secrets or governments or history. This was about survival, because whatever Project Wintervale had tried to contain was now awake. The morning after the explosion was unnaturally quiet. No bird sang. No insects buzzed. The entire forest seemed to hold its breath as gray smoke curled from the crater that had once contained the hatch. The red glow had faded, but a dull vibration still pulsed beneath the earth. Faint but steady, like the heartbeat of something vast and unseen. Claire stood at the rim of the crater, her boots sinking into the ash. The sphere still hovered in the center, perfectly still, its black surface reflecting the ashen sky. Ethan was beside her, his face pale and streaked with grime. His laptop had survived, barely, its cracked screen displaying one frozen line of text. "Received. Initiation complete." Behind them, the man in the long coat, Agent Harker, as they'd learned, spoke quietly into a radio that no longer transmitted. Static hissed back at him. His soldiers were gone. Their vehicles were gone. Blackridge itself was silent on every frequency. Claire's voice broke the stillness. "You said this thing was contained, that it couldn't activate without the suppressor. So what's it doing now?" Harker looked at the sphere, eyes hollow. "It's adapting. It's learning from what we built to control it." Ethan frowned. "Learning? From us?" "From everything," Harker said. "We didn't understand what it was when we found it. Not a machine, not a signal, but something between, a consciousness made of information. It doesn't live the way we do. It spreads through data, through energy, through thought." As if responding to his words, the surface of the sphere rippled, faint waves of light running across it like liquid metal. Then, with a deep resonant hum, it began to open. Thin seams appeared along its surface, unfolding like petals of black glass. Inside was an impossible light, white and crimson, swirling and alive. The air grew hotter, and Claire felt the ground vibrate beneath her feet. Ethan took a step back. "It's reacting to sound frequencies," he said, checking the readings. "Every time we speak, it mirrors us." Claire turned toward Harker. "You said this thing arrived during the Cold War. But if it's not from space, where did it come from?" Harker hesitated. "That's the part no one ever confirmed. The original scientists, both American and Soviet, believed it was a remnant of an older intelligence, something that predates civilization, something that's been waiting for our technology to evolve enough to understand it." A deep hum rose again, shaking the trees. Then, from the crater's edge, the ground cracked open, long fissures spreading outward like veins. Steam hissed from below. The earth pulsed. Ethan stared at the sphere's core, eyes wide. "It's tunneling into the power grid," he whispered. "Every source of electricity within miles, it's feeding on it." Claire's mind raced. If it reaches the town, it'll spread through every signal, every circuit, every server connected to the grid. Harker said grimly, Winter Veil wasn't a containment operation. It was a delaying tactic. The sky began to darken again, though no clouds gathered. Instead, a strange shimmer, like heat distortion, rippled across the horizon. The faint red glow that had vanished began to return, this time spreading outward like veins through the air. Claire clenched her jaw. There has to be a way to stop it. Harker opened a metal case he'd carried since the night before. Inside was a compact, high-frequency transmitter, its housing scorched, its cables frayed. This is what was used to suppress the core, he said. It emits a signal that disrupts its coherence. If we can amplify it through Ethan's laptop, we might shut it down before it integrates with the grid. Ethan nodded quickly. We'll need proximity. The closer we get, the stronger the effect. The three of them descended carefully into the crater, the air shimmering with heat and static. Every step closer made the vibration stronger, like walking inside the resonance of a giant bell. When they reached the base, the sound was almost unbearable. The open sphere loomed before them, its light pulsating in slow waves. Inside it, something moved, vast, shifting, almost humanoid but without form. A silhouette made of light and code. Ethan connected the transmitter. Powering it through my system, he said, typing rapidly. If I can stabilize a waveform. The ground shuddered violently. From the sphere came a blast of energy that knocked them to their knees. Claire's ears rang. She could hear a voice now, not out loud, but inside her head, words without sound. We were here before you spoke. You built our language into your machines. Now you called US back. Claire's pulse pounded. She shouted over the noise. Ethan, do it now. He slammed the key, and the transmitter emitted a piercing, high-frequency tone. The air vibrated violently. The sphere flickered. The silhouette inside convulsed, its form destabilizing. Keep it going. Harker yelled. The light flared brighter, waves of heat searing their faces. Ethan screamed as sparks flew from his laptop, the circuitry melting. Claire grabbed the transmitter, forcing its power dial higher. For a moment, the entire world seemed to hold still. Then the sphere imploded with a blinding flash. The sound vanished. The hum stopped. Silence. When Claire opened her eyes, the crater was filled with smoke. The sphere was gone, not shattered, not broken, simply absent. The air was cold again. The vibration beneath the earth had stopped. Ethan coughed, his hand shaking. Is it over? Harker stared at the empty crater. No, he said quietly. Energy doesn't disappear. It transfers. The signal's dormant again, waiting. Claire looked toward the horizon. The red shimmer had faded, but far away, beyond the tree line, a single tower light blinked 3 times, then paused, then blinked again. She felt her stomach turn. It's still out there. Harker met her gaze. You can't destroy what you built to understand. You can only hope it forgets you. As dawn broke, the sun rose weakly through the smoke. The world looked the same, yet nothing felt right. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was anticipation. Claire turned to Ethan. We released the story, she said. People need to know what's buried beneath our feet. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. But who would believe us? She looked back at the crater, where faint traces of static flickered like dying embers. It doesn't matter if they believe, she whispered. It only matters that we warn them. As they walked away, the wind carried a faint whisper through the trees. Not quite human, not quite mechanical. We learn. We wait. We return. And somewhere deep beneath the earth, a single pulse of red light answered, faint but alive.